The year is 1980 something. You're sitting at home as a kid wanting a game for your Nintendo Entertainment System. That game is The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time. And if you are one of those people, there are probably some things that you did not pay attention to when you were in the Deku Tree. So today, I'm going to be telling you about 5 things that you probably already know about in the Deku Tree. When everybody stumbles upon the Deku Tree for the first time, clearly a lot of things go through your head, but the most clear thing is the robust facial features of this fine tree right here. So if you look a little closer, you can clearly see that there's eyebrows and a mustache. These two features, while many people leave it at that, if you take a little bit of a closer look, it's clearly not made out of hair, it's made out of wood, and it looks to be the same wood that's in the Deku sticks and the Deku nuts. As we take our first initial steps into the Deku Tree for the first time, many things become apparent. But besides that, there's a Skulltula on the wall as you walk into the room. Skulltulas, they are creatures that get very confusing because some people might just call them Skulltulas because of their older brother, the Big Skulltula. But if you look a little closer, these are actually on the wall, so they're different. But that's not the point. The original name for these creatures was originally cranium crawlers. And that's interesting. The deeper we get into the Deku Tree, the deeper the mysteries begin to become. And as we walk into this room, while there is a giant Deku Baba that we take out easily, there are 2 smaller eggs for Goma larvae. These eggs, well, they may just be, an enemy placed here for difficulty. Many players have started to assume that there is a larger Goma that Goma originally had to mate with to create this larva. So this means there's a massive monster that is just terrorizing Hyrule, and Link never stopped it. And no matter how much you want to ignore this problem, the deeper we go into the Deku Tree, the more obvious it becomes that many creatures have been growing in size. We can see this most clearly in the Deku Babas, and I can just imagine the damage that could be done if other creatures started growing the same way they do. If we had other creatures growing to 2 or 3 times their size, as we see in the Deku Babas, the damage that could be done to the world of this game would be tremendous. And the deeper we dive into the Deku Tree, the more scary things come to fruition. As we can see in this room, there are 3 sets of Deku Scrubs. And Deku Scrubs, as we know them, they are sentient beings. And Link just viciously assaults them. And while we soon will learn that these Deku Scrubs are serving Goma, the fact that they're sentient beings being forced to work under Goma is just a terrifying thought to even think about. And with the final depth reached, we meet Goma. And what you've missed about Goma is something that not many people have talked about. If you look deep at this armored arachnid, clearly there's some missing things that nobody has noticed. As Goma crawls towards her prey, she is very much so in pain. You can clearly tell by her red eye. And while it may not look like it, even though we're fighting Goma, if we just brought some eye drops to her, this fight would have been over in an instant, because we would have saved her from her immense pain, which is the whole reason why she took over the Deku Tree in the first place. 3 things will race into your mind as you enter Dodongo's Cavern. 1. This is Dodongo's Cavern. 2. Bombs are the name of the game. And 3. I'm going to be showing you a few things you couldn't have missed in Dodongo's Cavern. As we enter the main chamber of this dungeon, one thing is right in the center. The big Dodongo skull. This skull, while many of us know is just the entrance to the boss arena, is actually the biggest archaeological discovery that has happened in Zelda, period. This creature, if it was ever awakened from its slumber of death, would wreak havoc. Deeper into the cavern, we can find a large staircase that has the requirements of being blown up to be traversed upon by Link, Clearly this staircase was not under regulation and up to code when it was created, so us blowing it up in this very dangerous way was against OSHA regulations. As we rise up on this platform, we meet a Deku man who has one goal: to defend himself and to sell. This situation is so sad because it shows us the sorry state of the Hyrulean economy, to where this man has to put himself in somewhere that would seem like his exact opposite environment a man like him would want to be in, just to make ends meet. One of the rooms in this dungeon has two Lizalfos jumping around, panicking. This is clearly because of the lava beneath their feet that is heating up the stones to unfathomable levels of heat. This is causing the Lizalfos so much pain that they have to stay light on their feet, jumping around, otherwise their skin on their feet is going to get burnt. And last but not least, as you enter into this room in Dodongo's Cavern, you start to get assaulted by ghosts. These ghosts are thought to be the lost souls of Goron's past who tried to defend Dodongo Cavern, their only source of food, from the Dodongos. It's kind of weird it was called Dodongo Cavern in the first place when they were trying to defend it from its namesake. With the foreshadowing in Dodongo's Cavern from throwing bombs into King Dodongo's mouth, clearly the game wanted to give us some foreshadowing to us going into Jabu's mouth. So today, I'm gonna give you the main things you probably couldn't have missed inside of Jabu's tummy. As we fade into Jabu's belly, one thing stood out to me the most. Jabu does not have a tongue, and this leaves many creatures inside his mouth to do as they please. I can imagine this would cause him extreme discomfort, especially considering that there are multiple cows stuck in his tonsils that he has no way of removing. And speaking of cows stuck inside of Jabu, many cows are used as switches on the walls of his stomach. And why would this work? The only logical explanation can be that these cows are entangled in Jabu's thick nervous system, which I can imagine would not be too comfortable for the cow and would be causing Jabu immense pain anytime these cows wiggle their limbs. With Jabu's stomach having many branching pathways and many corridors, it may not seem really realistic that this would be a stomach. It seems more of just like a dungeon that's just textured as a stomach for game design purposes. But if you look a little closer, the only place we ever find Lizalfos is in this specific corridor. And what's this corridor doing? It's moving you towards a specific cavity. This means Jabu's stomach is optimized and is here to move specific nutrients into specific cavities for optimal extraction. Everyone knows that the Big Octo in Ocarina of Time is reused in the southern swamp of Majora's Mask, but did you know the circle that Link runs in, or the Link and the Octo run in Ocarina of Time, is actually a metaphor for the circle of 3 days that you have in Majora's Mask? While the game clearly tells us what the Baronade is as a bioelectric anemone, clearly many people don't know what the actual name stands for. And if you look closely, the first letters BAR, that is a play on the word barnacle, which barnacle is a parasite for many aquatic wildlife. And the last part, nade, is a play on words with the word grenade because of its explosive nature to anyone around it and also how it looks. As we head into Link's older years, the first temple we come across is the Forest Temple. This temple, with its mesmerizing soundtrack and immensely unique gameplay flow, defines the differences between adult and young Link's dungeons. And today, I'm going to be showing you what you couldn't have missed. As we enter the main sanctum of the Forest Temple, we instantly come across 4 torches. These torches quickly extinguish and turn into 4 ghosts of varying colors. These colors are green, red, blue, and purple. All of these colors, while they may just seem random, actually are foreshadowing to the future Zelda game, Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures. With the old mansion aesthetic of the Forest Temple, many are led to believe that this used to be inhabited by many old Hyruleans years ago, and one of the driving forces of that theory are the 2 Wolfos in this room. These Wolfos used to be the patron of this mansion's dogs, but due to isolation grew out of control and hostile. As we enter the courtyard of the Forest Temple, we see 3 columns. Each of the columns are very similar in style and size, and if we take a closer look, it's pretty clear to see that these columns are based off of the Roman Tuscan columns that you can see in many Roman structures to this day. As we delve deeper into the Forest Temple, we come across a room that has a floor that is very similar to a chessboard, and while the room's shape doesn't resemble a chessboard whatsoever, the board that falls from the ceiling clearly is Hyrule's form of chess, and the family that used to live here must have loved playing on this board. The Phantom Ganon boss fight is one of the most iconic boss fights in Ocarina of Time, and while everyone was shocked to see Ganon so soon after the transition from young to adult Link, we quickly learned that it was just a phantom and nothing was suspicious. But one thing that's odd is at the halfway point of the boss fight, when you shoot Ganon or Phantom Ganon off his horse, the horse actually just runs back into the painting. This must mean that the horse was actually not a phantom, and it was Ganon's real horse that rode off away to return to the real Ganon. After bullying a little Goron child for stealing your name by stealing his clothes, you make it to the Fire Temple. And this temple, with its controversial music changes and unique design, I'm going to be telling you what you couldn't have missed. After struggling to solve the first room of the dungeon's puzzle, we come and find Darunia. The thing about Darunia here is he's trying to stop the dragon from attacking any other people in Hyrule. So what he does is he runs in the room to try to stop it before you get there. But the weird thing is, he locks the door behind him. And some people think it's because he wants you to stay back and save the Goron prisoners, but it's actually just because Darunia has a bad habit of always locking doors behind him when he walks into another room. The only like we see in this dungeon is in the first Goron prisoner's room. This like eats your shield and takes away your tunic. Luckily, there's a chest to get back our shield, but this like is made just so you will be paranoid not to make use of your shield for the rest of the dungeon. The faces on the walls in the Fire Temple, when shot by a hookshot, usually give the player items. But did you know that these faces are actually sentient? And the reason they give you an item when shot with the hookshot is because they are pleading to you not to use the bow, because if you use the bow, it will cause them irreparable damage. One of the most memorable fights in the Fire Temple are the Flare Dancers. This fight is where you hookshot the enemy, and then you can slash it to your heart's content. But did you know, the transformation from Red Flame to Blue Flame to Green Flame is actually foreshadowing to Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, when you as the player transforms into a blue transformation, a green transformation, and a red transformation. Zora, Deku, and Goron Link. After defeating Volvagia, the weird thing is he dives back under the lava and then he flies out and then he suddenly burns out. The way this happens is most likely due to Link, after fighting him, depleted all of Volvagia's magic and he wasn't able to sustain his fire-resistant powers anymore. After fighting your way through a large cavern and unfreezing a large fish, you make it to the Water Temple. The Water Temple is one of the most unique dungeons in Ocarina of Time and definitely one of the most loved. And today, I'm going to be telling you what you couldn't have missed. In many rooms in the Water Temple, we come across plaques on the wall that look very close to the shape of a dragon. While we do see a statue of a real dragon is never seen in the Water Temple. Equipping and unequipping the Iron Boots was one of the reasons this dungeon is so loved. But the Iron Boots are actually extremely uncomfortable to wear. Thus, every time we put them on Link, he is in severe pain. When entering this room, you are greeted by a massive group of Dodongos. And while many people theorize that Morpha might have stolen or captured these Dodongos from King Dodongo, the story goes, or as the story goes, these Dodongos were actually gifted to Morpha by King Dodongo to help defend the Water Temple from Link. From looking at Dark Link, we can tell that he is not just a normal enemy. He is transparent and can predict Link's moves at a higher level than any other enemy. While many people have failed to identify what Dark Link actually is, if you look a little closer, in addition to being transparent, he also looks very gelatinous, which means that Dark Link is the only Choo-Choo we see in Ocarina of Time, and clearly the most advanced Choo-Choo we have ever seen in the history of Zelda. When we meet Ruto in the Water Temple, we are told to follow her, and when we do so, she somehow disappears completely. And this is pretty unexplainable if we look at the room itself, because there's just a barred door and nothing else in there. But with her telling us to thank Sheik after we defeat Morpha, we finally understand how she disappears. Ruto is actually trained in the Sheikah methods by Sheik, which is why she tells us to tell her thank you, which completely explains how she was able to disappear at the top of this water shaft. As we near the end of our journey, one of the most unique dungeons appears, the Spirit Temple. With its Colossus statue and 2 new items, this temple is no stranger to turning back time to change things up. Let's go see what you couldn't have missed. As we enter the dungeon as a child, we encounter Naboru for the first time, and she weirdly asks Link the question, do we work for Ganondorf? This is an odd question considering Link's appearance as a Kokiri, but considering the fact that Naboru is a part of the Gerudos, she would know things that we don't about the Kokiri, which means some of the Kokiri must have turned against the Deku Tree and are acting as spies for Ganon, which is why Naboru is so suspicious of us. With young Link's encounter with an Iron Knuckle, we see that the Iron Knuckle is missing a lot of his swings on young Link, and while this can't be attributed to Link's small stature, this is actually due to the visibility of the mask being mainly horizontal and not vertical. Thus, this does not allow the Iron Knuckle to lower his head, which means he can't even see young Link while fighting, which causes him to miss majority of his attacks. In one of the rooms leading up to the Mirror Shield, a chest can be found that hides an invisible switch inside. This switch is required to open the door to the Mirror Shield, and this switch, it's usually supposed to be seen by the Lens of Truth, but Link, by sheer chance, accidentally hit it with his sword, which allowed him to complete this dungeon. In this room, after you play all 5 required songs, you gain access to a room with too many Skulltulas to count. These Skulltulas are actually a subtle nod to the House of Skulltula, mocking the humans wrought with their curse. During the Twinrova fight, Link must use the attacks of one of the sisters to attack the other. However, when they combine, while you would think they would gain both their immunities, they actually cancel each other out. This shows the fragile ego of each sister in their power, allowing themselves to be hit just because if either one of their attacks got nullified, it would show weakness in their abilities, thus harming their perception of their power. After delving into a well and killing a curse to steal its eye, we make it to the Shadow Temple. And as we come upon our last temple, let's see what we couldn't have missed. In the first room of the Shadow Temple, you come across an eagle statue which you need to turn towards the true skull. This is actually a reference to the hover boots you are about to receive in the dungeon, which grants you flight, but if misused over pits, can cost you your life. Deeper in the Shadow Temple, we come across many guillotines. These guillotines are usually placed in random areas around the Shadow Temple to deter the player. These guillotines were actually the guillotines that were used to give out the death penalty in Hyrule, but since that was outlawed, they have now been put into use as traps. In majority of the rooms in the Shadow Temple, you can find tons of silver rupees. These are usually seen in many temples and caves, but due to the sheer amount of them in the Shadow Temple, clearly something is off about them. With the history we know about the Shadow Temple and how it was used for brutal interrogations from the Sheikah, this must mean that besides from just taking information from their suspects, they also would plunder rupees from their suspects to gain wealth for the royal family. The catacombs are a very disturbing part of the Shadow Temple, because getting to see a physical representation of the sheer amount of suspects the Sheikah had disposed of or interrogated is very unsettling. The boat in the Shadow Temple is such an iconic moment in Ocarina of Time. Most people, when reminiscing on this part of the game, remember the awe of seeing this scene for the first time. However, this segment was so good that the whole concept of utilizing a boat in a Zelda game was utilized for the Wind Waker HD. The fight with Bongo Bongo is one of the only fights that can threaten you with the constant fear of running out of magic. Not only is it integral to the fight, but without magic, you can't even see Bongo Bongo. But sadly, while it lets you see Bongo Bongo, it doesn't let you see his feelings. And to be honest, Bongo Bongo isn't even a lackey of Ganon, he was genuinely just trying to play music on his bongo, but sadly we ruin his solo by attacking him. After watching Zelda get captured, everything we have gone through finally culminates to the tower that's been looming over Hyrule. As we approach Ganon's castle with only one thing left to do, let's head on in and see what we couldn't have missed for the last time. With Ganon's castle being separated into sections that were based off of each dungeon, every player gets to reminisce on their whole journey up till this point. This feature was also thought out so that players who forgot who each sage was would receive a refresher on who they were right before fighting Ganon. The Golden Gauntlets are one of the most iconic gear upgrades in Ocarina of Time. Its extremely cool effect on the obelisks that we can now throw around like nothing really put into perspective how far we have come from the Goron bracelet. However, when Link receives this new piece of gear, it's almost as if he's hypnotized to instantly neglect his responsibility to save Hyrule by running outside and testing it out on the first rock he sees. In the water section of Ganon's castle, this is one of the only areas that completely neglects its temple's namesake, and utilizes the Cavern as a blueprint for its section. While many people attribute this to the developers disliking their design of the water temple, this is actually due to the fact that Ganon's view of himself is cool, and if he melts the ice to create a water temple-like section, that would mean the downfall of his ice-cold attitude. Deeper in Ganon's castle, we find the fire section of the dungeon. This room is very similar to one of the Fire Temple's rooms, and actually is a very similar parallel feature. In the Fire Temple, there's a room that when you fall, it sends you back to one of the first rooms of the dungeon. This is perfectly mirrored inside this section of Ganon's castle by when falling off a platform in this room, your collected silver rupees reset. Everyone knows that you can actually deflect Ganon's attacks with a bottle, but did you know the way Ganon reflects attacks back is also by a bottle? If we zoom in and look very carefully, we can see it plain as day as an empty bottle. And finally, as we all know, the reason Ganon is able to transform is because of his Triforce of Power, but the shape he takes, weirdly enough, is said to be his true form, meaning that even though he lived his whole life with the illusion of free choice, no matter what path he took, he would still eventually steal the Triforce of Power and take form as a monstrosity, which usually ends 9 times out of 10 by a child Link with a Deku stick. And that is the end of what you couldn't have missed in every Ocarina of Time dungeon. I hope you're entertained at my grasping at straws, and if you enjoyed it, you know what to do.